The pyramids of Giza are among the most studied structures on Earth, yet their beginnings remain uncertain. History often presents them as products of dynastic Egypt, built by known kings, dated to known centuries, and explained through familiar tools and labor. But beneath those explanations, the ground itself tells a quieter story. Long before names were carved into stone, the plateau was shaped, leveled, and aligned with deliberate care. Foundations appear older than the monuments they support. Spaces were sealed and left empty. Precision appears where experimentation should exist. This documentary does not argue for a single hidden answer. Instead, it examines the evidence that resists simple timelines. By following the stone rather than the stories, we explore how Giza may have been inherited rather than invented, and how knowledge can survive without language. What emerges is not a revelation, but a deeper question about how much of the past was never meant to be explained. Before the pharaohs, the ground that refused to explain itself. Long before royal names were carved into stone, the Giza Plateau already stood apart from the surrounding desert. Travelers approaching from the Nile noticed the difference without understanding it. The land did not rise gradually or erode naturally like nearby ridges. Instead, it appeared flattened, leveled, and shaped. The surface limestone was cut down to bedrock across a wide area, creating a stable platform that resisted wind and sand. This preparation did not resemble the casual clearing of ground. It resembled planning. When Napoleon's expedition arrived in Egypt in 1798, engineers were assigned to document the terrain. Pierre-Simon Girard was among them. His notes describe a plateau that seemed intentionally finished. Beneath drifting sand, Girard recorded straight edges, cut surfaces, and shallow trenches that did not match the profiles of known dynastic quarries. These marks were not decorative. They served no visible ritual purpose. They appeared functional, as if the ground itself had been prepared to receive something larger. The surrounding desert offers a contrast. Beyond the plateau's edges, the land becomes irregular again. Wind-shaped ridges and natural fractures dominate the landscape. The transition is abrupt. This suggests that the plateau was not chosen because it was naturally flat. It was made flat. The act required removing millions of tons of limestone, shaping the bedrock with consistent depth, and maintaining alignment across hundreds of meters. Such work implies a long-term plan that predates any surviving inscription. Modern maps emphasize monuments. Attention rises upward, toward pyramids, causeways, and temples. The ground beneath them is treated as background. Yet the bedrock carries information older than walls or carvings. The plateau slopes gently toward the north, not toward the Nile. This slope follows true cardinal alignment with remarkable consistency. Geological processes do not produce this orientation. Wind erosion does not respect cardinal points. Water runoff follows gravity, not stars. The alignment suggests measurement rather than chance. True north alignment appears repeatedly at Giza. The sides of the Great Pyramid deviate by only a few arc minutes. This precision depends on stable reference points. The bedrock itself provides that stability. Aligning massive structures becomes easier when the ground has already been oriented. This raises a quiet question. Was the plateau prepared as a foundation before the pyramids were even conceived by dynastic rulers? In 1859, Charles Piazzi Smyth arrived at Giza with astronomical instruments. He was not an Egyptologist, he was an astronomer. His interest lay in angles, measurements, and orientation. Smyth recorded repeated values in the slope and layout of the plateau that corresponded with known stellar cycles. He proposed that the alignments reflected the position of circumpolar stars as they appeared around 10,500 BCE. His interpretation was controversial and later dismissed, yet his measurements were accurate. The numbers exist whether the explanation is accepted or not. No Egyptian text references this date. No pharaoh claims authorship at such a remote time. The alignment remains without attribution. It exists beneath structures dated thousands of years later. This disconnect between physical evidence and written record defines much of the problem at Giza. Stone speaks first. Text arrives much later. Early Egyptian records address origins with caution. The Palermo stone, a fragmented basalt slab dated to the 5th dynasty, lists rulers who reigned before the first pharaohs. These rulers are not described as ordinary humans. They belong to an earlier order. They are called the Shemsu Hor, translated as the followers of Horus. Their reigns span hundreds of years each. The structure of the list matches later king lists. Names are ordered. Reigns are measured. The stone does not label them as myth. Modern interpretations often separate these figures from history. Yet the ancient record does not. The Palermo stone treats them as predecessors. The transition from their age to the dynastic era is recorded without explanation. There is no account of conquest, collapse, or creation. There is only succession. Something existed before kings. Then kings ruled what remained. Manetho, an Egyptian priest writing in Greek during the 3rd century BCE, preserved a similar framework. His history describes an age ruled by gods and semi-divine beings before the first human dynasties. His writings survive only in later quotations, yet the timeline aligns broadly with earlier sources. Thousands of years precede the dynastic period. These beings do not erect monuments in his account. They rule, then withdraw. The absence of construction narratives is notable. Egyptian culture celebrated building. Temples recorded foundation ceremonies. Reliefs depicted labor, offerings, and rituals tied to construction. Yet the pyramids lack such origin stories. They appear fully formed in the archaeological record. Kings claim ownership, not invention. Their names are added to existing stone rather than carved into freshly quarried blocks at the deepest levels. Archaeology confronts this silence directly beneath the monuments. Excavations under the pyramids reveal no earlier occupation layers, no debris fields, no transitional construction zones. The oldest quarry marks appear above finished stone surfaces. This implies that later builders removed stone from existing structures or platforms rather than creating them from untouched bedrock. In many cases, the quarrying activity damages earlier precision surfaces, suggesting reuse. In 1934, Egyptian archaeologist Selim Hassan documented repairs on the Great Pyramid's casing stones. He observed that some blocks showed advanced weathering before repair inscriptions were added. Weathering requires exposure. Exposure requires time. The period between original placement and repair appears longer than the 4th dynasty allows. Hassan noted this observation without speculation. The stone condition spoke for itself. The Sphinx deepens the uncertainty. Carved directly from bedrock, it rests within an enclosure whose walls display vertical erosion channels. These channels resemble water runoff rather than wind abrasion. Egypt's climate has been arid for thousands of years. Heavy rainfall, capable of producing such erosion, last occurred near the end of the last ice age. In 1992, geologist Robert Schoch presented this evidence publicly. Debate followed. The erosion patterns remain unchanged. Dynastic Egyptians interacted with the Sphinx as an ancient object. Inscriptions describe clearing sand, repairing damage, and restoring features. They do not describe carving it. The dream stele of Thutmose IV refers to the Sphinx as a forgotten monument buried in sand. Forgotten implies age. Forgotten implies inheritance. The Sphinx appears not as a creation of dynastic ambition, but as a relic already present. The Valley Temple near the Sphinx exhibits similar traits. Its granite blocks weigh over 200 tons each. They are fitted with extreme precision, with joints so tight that modern blades cannot pass between them. These blocks were transported from Aswan, over 800 kilometers away. The methods used remain debated. Later additions to the temple use smaller stones and visible mortar. The difference is immediate. Construction quality declines over time rather than improves. This reversal challenges standard narratives of technological progression. Typically, techniques become more refined. At Giza, the earliest visible work is the most precise. Later generations maintain, modify, and imitate without matching the original standard. This pattern suggests that later builders inherited methods they did not fully control. Ancient texts hint at this inheritance indirectly. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in the world, describe the pyramids as sacred pathways rather than new monuments. They speak of ascension routes, sky ladders, and eternal circuits already known. The language assumes familiarity. It does not explain origins. Kings insert themselves into an existing cosmic architecture. They do not claim to design it. Foundational myths are absent. No text describes the first idea of a pyramid. No story celebrates its invention. This silence is unusual. Cultures record achievements. Egypt recorded nearly everything. The omission stands out. It suggests that the pyramids were not perceived as new creations needing explanation. Scientific dating methods add complexity rather than clarity. Organic material within mortar samples yields a wide range of dates. Some samples predate the 4th dynasty by centuries. Others postdate it. The variation is often attributed to reused organic material, such as old charcoal. Yet reuse implies access to older sources. Those sources must originate somewhere. The dates do not converge neatly. They scatter across time. Early excavation records contain overlooked details. In 1902, sealed cavities were discovered beneath sections of the plateau. They contained no artifacts, only air and fine mineral dust. These spaces were dismissed as natural voids. Later, ground-penetrating scans revealed straight edges and right angles. Natural voids rarely form perfect corners. These chambers were sealed before dynastic construction and left untouched. The purpose of these spaces remains unknown. They were not tombs, they were not storage chambers. They appear intentional, yet empty. Absence becomes evidence here. Something was planned, then abandoned or completed in a way no longer visible. Egyptian engineers were capable builders. Their achievements are undeniable. What remains uncertain is whether they originated the earliest and largest stoneworks at Giza. The evidence does not accuse them of false claims. Instead, it suggests continuity. A civilization encountering vast stone structures would adapt them, assign meaning, and integrate them into belief systems. This behavior appears repeatedly throughout history. Structures outlive their builders. New cultures inherit old foundations. Rome reused Greek temples. Medieval builders repurposed Roman stone. In Mesoamerica, new pyramids were built atop older ones. Inheritance is common. The scale at Giza may simply be larger and older than expected. The Giza Plateau resists a single timeline. It presents preparation without records, alignments without explanation, erosion without consensus, and spaces without purpose. The land itself appears older than the stories told about it. Dynastic Egypt stands clearly within history, documented by texts, artifacts, and continuity. What came before remains visible only through stone shaped with intent, surfaces aligned to an older sky, and silence where origin stories should be. The ground does not explain itself. It waits, level and precise, holding evidence without narrative. The pyramids rise from it, but the platform beneath them carries a longer memory, one that predates names, crowns, and dynasties, and continues to endure without speaking. The age before writing, when builders left no names. Long before symbols were pressed into clay or carved into stone, human activity left marks that were not linguistic. At Giza, this absence is not subtle. The deepest layers beneath the plateau contain shaped stone without writing, without decoration, and without attribution. This silence does not result from erosion alone. In many cases, surfaces are preserved well enough to hold inscriptions if they had ever been placed there. Writing in Egypt appears suddenly. By the early dynastic period, hieroglyphs are already complex, symbolic, and standardized. There is no long experimental phase preserved in the archaeological record. Signs do not slowly evolve from crude marks into refined symbols. Instead, they arrive fully formed. This abrupt appearance suggests that writing developed elsewhere, or earlier, then entered the historical record already mature. The builders associated with the earliest stonework at Giza left nothing comparable behind. Beneath the pyramids, excavation reveals finished stone rather than transitional debris. No trial carvings appear. No abandoned inscriptions exist beneath later ones. The foundational layers are functional, not expressive. Surfaces are cut flat or angled precisely. Corners meet at consistent degrees. The stone appears intended to support, align, or anchor. Communication was not its purpose. Archaeologists often rely on tool traces to identify cultures. At Giza, tool marks vary sharply by depth. Upper layers show copper chisel patterns consistent with Old Kingdom techniques. Deeper cuts display smoother surfaces and different abrasion signatures. These marks do not align neatly with known dynastic tools. They suggest methods that produced uniform finishes across large areas without leaving deep impact scars. Experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate these surfaces. Copper tools struggle to achieve the same consistency on hard limestone without extensive time and repeated passes. Even then, the resulting textures differ. The deeper cuts appear planned rather than corrected. They do not show signs of error removal. This implies confidence in method, not experimentation. The absence of work camps at foundational levels reinforces this impression. Dynastic construction sites leave debris. Broken tools, pottery shards, food remains, and temporary shelters accumulate quickly. At Giza, such material appears only in layers associated with later pyramid construction. The ground was shaped without leaving behind the everyday refuse of large labor forces. Some researchers have suggested that earlier builders worked differently. Smaller populations, longer timelines, minimal waste. These ideas remain speculative, yet they address the gap directly. A culture operating without mass production would leave fewer traces. Over thousands of years, those traces could vanish entirely. Stone, however, would remain. Egyptian mythology preserves faint echoes of such an age. Texts speak of a time when gods ruled directly and humans followed without question. This period is not described in detail. It exists as a boundary condition, a time before measurement by kings. Actions occur, but actors are unnamed. Places exist, but origins are assumed. The concept of Zep Tepi, the first time, appears repeatedly in religious texts. It refers to a primordial age when order was established. Temples were said to replicate forms set down during this era. The language implies that sacred geometry pre-existed human rule. Kings did not invent order. They restored it. At Giza, geometry dominates. Distances, angles, and proportions recur across structures. The spacing between pyramids follows patterns linked to cardinal points and solar events. These relationships persist regardless of dynastic modifications. Later builders align their additions to existing frameworks. They do not alter the underlying grid. Without writing, how were such plans transmitted? Oral tradition remains a possibility. Knowledge can persist for long periods without written records. However, oral transmission typically leaves variation. At Giza, variation is minimal. This consistency suggests reference to fixed standards rather than memory alone. Some have proposed that measurement systems themselves predate dynastic Egypt. Units such as the royal cubit appear standardized early. The cubit's length corresponds closely to proportions found in the Great Pyramid. Whether the unit was derived from the structure or the structure from the unit remains debated. The relationship itself implies continuity across time. Stone vessels offer another clue. Pre-dynastic sites across Egypt contain hard stone bowls carved with extreme precision. These objects predate writing and dynastic authority. Their symmetry rivals modern machining. No clear explanation exists for how they were produced with known tools. They appear suddenly, then gradually disappear as simpler pottery becomes dominant. Skill declines as population and writing increase. This pattern mirrors what is seen at Giza. The most refined stonework appears earliest. Later periods emphasize decoration and inscription rather than precision. Craft shifts from structural mastery to symbolic display. Inscriptions from later periods occasionally acknowledge this inheritance indirectly. Phrases such as "renewing the monuments of the ancestors" appear in temple texts. The ancestors are not named. Their works are treated as ancient even in early dynastic times. Restoration becomes a recurring theme. Creation does not. The lack of names is consistent. Pharaohs recorded victories, offerings, even minor events. If they had built the largest stone structures in history from bare rock, such acts would likely be commemorated. Instead, inscriptions focus on maintenance, dedication, and ritual use. The pyramids are places to ascend, not achievements to announce. Modern archaeology relies heavily on written context. Where text is absent, interpretation becomes cautious. At Giza, this caution often leads to default assumptions. Structures are attributed to known kings because later inscriptions associate them with those names, yet association does not prove origin. Ownership does not equal construction. Radiocarbon dating of organic material near construction sites provides broad ranges. These ranges often overlap dynastic periods, but they do not anchor the deepest stonework precisely. Stone itself cannot be dated directly with such methods. The oldest layers remain chronologically open. Some researchers have attempted to date weathering patterns instead. Erosion rates vary by climate. At Giza, certain features imply exposure to conditions not present during the dynastic era. These observations remain controversial. Yet they persist because the physical evidence persists. The builders before writing left no myths explaining their actions. They left no royal decrees. They left no biographies. What they left was ground shaped to exact standards, aligned with the sky, and prepared to support structures that later cultures would adopt. Their absence from text may indicate a time before text was considered necessary. Writing often emerges alongside administration. Taxes, labor organization, and centralized power require record-keeping. A society operating with different priorities might not develop writing at all. If the earliest builders focused on spatial order rather than social hierarchy, their legacy would be architectural, not textual. This idea does not require advanced technology beyond known possibilities. It requires time, continuity, and purpose. Over long periods, small groups can accomplish large tasks if their goals remain stable. The stone does not record how long it took. It records only that it was done. The age before writing remains invisible in conventional timelines because it resists categorization. It does not fit neatly between known cultures. It leaves no names to catalogue, yet its presence is felt beneath everything that followed. Dynastic Egypt rose on prepared ground, both physically and conceptually. The pyramids, temples, and causeways function as overlays. They adapt earlier frameworks to new beliefs. The deeper layer remains unchanged, uninscribed, and unresolved. It does not contradict Egyptian history. It precedes it. Without writing, the earliest builders cannot speak directly. Their testimony exists in alignment, proportion, and restraint. They shaped space rather than narrative. Later cultures filled that space with meaning, names, and stories. The foundation itself remained quiet. Giza preserves this silence with unusual clarity. Many ancient sites were rebuilt repeatedly, erasing early phases. At Giza, the bedrock endures. It holds evidence of planning without language, execution without celebration, and purpose without explanation. The age before writing is not defined by absence alone. It is defined by what remains unchanged despite everything added later. Stone cut cleanly, angles held steady, distances preserved. These are statements made without words, continuing to exist regardless of interpretation. What this age represents cannot be summarized easily. It is not a lost civilization described in myth. It is not a forgotten dynasty waiting to be named. It is a condition in which construction preceded documentation, and meaning followed form rather than guiding it. The builders left no names because names may not have mattered. Their work did not require recognition to function. It required accuracy. That accuracy remains measurable today, even as explanations shift. The plateau holds this earlier age beneath every monument. It does not reveal it openly. It allows later structures to stand above it. The silence continues, not as a void, but as a boundary that history has not crossed. The sky as a blueprint. When stone followed the stars. At Giza, orientation is not incidental. The placement of every major structure reflects a consistent relationship with the sky. This relationship is precise enough to suggest planning rather than symbolism. The pyramids are aligned to true north with accuracy that exceeds most ancient constructions. The deviation of the Great Pyramid from true north is less than 4 arc minutes. Achieving this level of precision requires repeated observation, stable reference points, and an understanding of long-term celestial motion. Dynastic Egyptian texts describe the sky as sacred, yet they do not explain how such precision was achieved. Ritual language surrounds the stars, but technical descriptions are absent. The alignment itself exists without instruction. Stone preserves the result. not the method. True north does not remain fixed over millennia. Earth's axis slowly shifts through a process known as precession. The position of the north celestial pole changes over time, completing a cycle roughly every 25,920 years. Any alignment based on stellar observation must therefore correspond to a specific period. The orientation at Giza matches a sky configuration that does not align neatly with 4th dynasty dates. Several independent studies have noted that the pyramid alignments correspond closely with the position of circumpolar stars around the end of the last ice age. These stars never set. They circle the pole endlessly, making them ideal reference points for a culture focused on permanence. In later Egyptian belief, these stars became associated with immortality. Kings sought to join them after death. The symbolism appears secondary to an earlier practical use. The pyramid texts describe the king ascending to the imperishable ones. These are the circumpolar stars. The texts do not describe discovering them. They describe returning to them. The language suggests familiarity rather than innovation. The stars were already part of an inherited system of meaning. At ground level, the layout of the Giza Plateau reinforces this celestial focus. The 3 main pyramids form a diagonal pattern that mirrors the stars of Orion's belt. This relationship has been debated extensively. What remains uncontested is that the spacing between the pyramids is deliberate. It follows proportional relationships that are repeated elsewhere on the plateau. The causeways extend eastward, aligning with sunrise events at specific times of year. The Sphinx faces due east. It looks directly toward the horizon where the sun rises during the equinoxes. This orientation is exact. It does not drift. It was carved to face that point. Dynastic Egyptians later associated the Sphinx with solar worship, yet the alignment existed before those associations were formalized. The monument's gaze was fixed long before its meaning was named. Celestial reference systems require stability. Observations must be repeated across generations to confirm accuracy. This implies continuity. A single ruler's lifetime is insufficient to establish such a system fully. The builders needed time, patience, and an unchanging goal. These conditions suggest a culture that valued long-term observation over rapid expansion. Egyptian calendars later reflected stellar cycles. The heliacal rising of Sirius marked the Nile flood and the new year. This system appears fully formed in early dynastic times. Like writing, it arrives without visible experimentation. The knowledge was already mature. Its origin is not recorded. Some scholars argue that Egyptian priests inherited astronomical knowledge from earlier observers. The priests acted as keepers rather than inventors. This role aligns with the broader pattern at Giza. Knowledge is preserved, not created anew. Structures are maintained, not fundamentally altered. The bedrock preparation of the plateau supports this idea. Aligning massive stoneworks to the sky requires a stable platform. Even small shifts in ground level can distort long-distance sightlines. The leveling of the plateau appears designed to eliminate such variables. The ground becomes a reference plane, allowing the sky to serve as a guide. Later dynastic additions respect this framework. Temples and causeways conform to existing alignments. They do not contradict them. When deviations occur, they are minor and constrained. The original grid remains dominant. This suggests reverence rather than control. Builders adapt to something they did not design. Astronomical ceilings in later tombs depict stars and constellations, yet these are symbolic representations. At Giza, the symbolism is embedded in stone placement rather than carved imagery. The difference matters. Symbolism can change. Stone placement cannot easily be altered once complete. The absence of explanatory texts remains striking. No inscription describes how the sky was used as a blueprint. No manual survives. The knowledge appears implicit. Those who inherited the structures accepted their orientation as given. They built meaning around it rather than questioning it. Some researchers have proposed that the builders tracked precession itself. If so, they possessed a concept of deep time. Precession is slow. Detecting it requires comparing observations across centuries. A culture capable of this would think in spans far longer than a single reign. Such thinking contrasts with dynastic politics, which focused on lineage and succession. The idea of deep time appears elsewhere in Egyptian belief. The concept of cyclical renewal, of ages repeating, permeates religious texts. These ideas may reflect inherited observations of the sky's slow changes. The stars shift, the land remains. Order persists through repetition. At Giza, this order is expressed physically. Distances between monuments correspond to ratios rather than absolute units. These ratios remain consistent regardless of scale. Such proportional planning suggests abstraction. Builders thought in relationships, not measurements alone. This mode of thinking aligns with astronomy, where angles and cycles matter more than distances. The sky provides a stable reference beyond human affairs. Aligning stone to stars removes construction from political time. The monument becomes part of a larger system. This perspective fits a culture focused on permanence rather than display. The lack of inscriptions reinforces this. The work did not need explanation. Its function was self-evident to those who understood the system. Later generations preserved the alignments even when their meaning shifted. Solar worship expanded. Funerary rituals evolved, yet the underlying orientation remained unchanged. This persistence suggests that altering the original layout was unthinkable. The sky-based framework held authority beyond any single belief system. The Giza Plateau thus operates as a map, not of territory, but of time. Its orientation fixes a moment in the sky. That moment does not correspond neatly to dynastic chronologies. It points further back, toward a period when observation preceded record-keeping. This does not require imagining lost technologies. It requires recognizing patience. Observing the sky, night after night, year after year, produces knowledge slowly. Embedding that knowledge into stone ensures it outlasts observers. Writing is fragile by comparison. Stone aligned to the sky endures. The builders who followed the stars did not sign their work. Their reference points were above them, not behind them. Names mattered less than alignment. Accuracy mattered more than attribution. Giza reflects this priority clearly. The sky dictated the plan. The ground was shaped to follow it. Later cultures inherited both and adapted their beliefs accordingly. The blueprint remained unchanged, even as stories grew around it. The stars continue to move. Precession shifts the sky slowly away from its ancient configuration. The stone remains fixed, preserving a relationship that no longer matches the present sky exactly. This mismatch is evidence. It anchors the construction to a past moment rather than a continuous present. The sky as a blueprint does not explain who built Giza. It explains how thinking preceded writing. It shows that orientation came before inscription, and observation before narration. The builders encoded their knowledge in placement rather than text. That knowledge remains readable through measurement. It does not require belief. It requires attention. Stone aligned to the sky preserves intent long after language fades. The plateau continues to hold that alignment, unchanged, waiting beneath monuments that speak more loudly but no less about their own foundation. Stone without scars. The problem of tool marks. At Giza, the stone itself functions as a record. Every surface preserves evidence of how it was shaped. Unlike inscriptions, these marks cannot be revised by later hands. They remain fixed in place, even when interpretation changes. When examined closely, the deepest stonework on the plateau presents a quiet but persistent problem. It does not resemble the marks left by known dynastic tools. Tools from the Old Kingdom are well documented. Copper chisels, dolerite pounding stones, wooden mallets, and sand-based abrasives appear in tomb scenes, tool caches, and quarry sites across Egypt. These tools leave recognizable signatures. Chisel strikes create uneven grooves. Pounders leave clustered impact scars. Abrasives produce shallow, directional striations. These patterns are visible in quarries dated securely to dynastic periods. At Giza, such marks are present in upper layers. Quarry faces associated with casing stones show overlapping chisel lines and irregular removal. Blocks display correction marks where errors were adjusted. These surfaces reflect active work under pressure. Stone was shaped, checked, reshaped, and set. Deeper levels tell a different story. Beneath the pyramids and within foundational masonry, large limestone surfaces are uniformly flat. They are not polished for appearance. They are even, continuous, and consistent. Tool chatter is minimal. Impact scars are scarce. In several locations, the stone appears shaved rather than struck, as though material was removed gradually and deliberately rather than broken away. This distinction has been observed since the 19th century. Early surveyors noted the unusual regularity of foundational surfaces. These comments were often recorded without explanation and later overlooked. The prevailing assumption remained that dynastic tools were responsible, even if the results seemed atypical. Yet repeated experimental attempts to reproduce these surfaces with known tools have struggled to match the consistency. Copper chisels deform quickly when applied to hard limestone. They require frequent reshaping. Dolerite pounders can remove material efficiently, but they do so unevenly. Producing broad, flat planes with such tools demands extensive secondary finishing. That finishing leaves visible traces. At Giza's deepest levels, many surfaces show no evidence of repeated correction. They appear planned from the outset. Corner geometry reinforces this impression. Right angles extend across long distances with little deviation. Maintaining such precision requires stable measuring systems and repeatable methods. Small errors compound quickly in stone. Later dynastic structures often compensate with mortar. At Giza's foundational levels, joints are dry-fitted. Stone meets stone directly, gaps are minimal. Granite elements complicate the picture further. The Valley Temple and portions of the Sphinx enclosure contain massive granite blocks weighing over 200 tons. Granite is significantly harder than limestone. Copper tools cannot cut it efficiently without abrasives and prolonged effort. Even then, results are inconsistent. Modern diamond tools still struggle to replicate some ancient finishes. On these granite blocks, surface patterns run in controlled, consistent directions. The striations suggest abrasion rather than impact. They do not resemble pounding marks. The resulting surfaces are smooth without being decorative. No definitive explanation exists for how such finishes were achieved repeatedly at scale using known Old Kingdom methods. Depth consistency adds another layer. In dynastic quarry sites, cut depth varies as tools wear and are replaced. At Giza, certain cuts maintain uniform depth across meters of stone. This implies controlled removal rather than reactive shaping. The work appears measured rather than improvised. Interlocking geometry appears in core masonry. Some blocks are subtly convex where adjacent stones are concave. This increases stability by distributing weight. Producing such complementary shapes requires foresight. It is easier to stack flat blocks and compensate with mortar. Choosing interlocking forms suggests a focus on permanence over speed. Later builders did not apply this method consistently. Their additions rely more heavily on straight faces and filler materials. The technique appears earlier, then fades. The most refined methods appear first, then decline. Absence becomes relevant again. No discarded tools associated with the deepest work have been found. Dynastic construction zones preserve broken chisels, worn pounders, and abrasive residues. Beneath Giza's deepest levels, such debris is absent. Either the tools were removed deliberately, or they were made from materials that left little archaeological trace. Some researchers propose organic tools combined with abrasives. Others suggest extended stone-on-stone grinding. These ideas remain speculative. What can be stated with certainty is that the physical evidence does not align neatly with the expected byproducts of large dynastic workforces operating under known conditions. Correction marks offer another clue. Construction normally involves error. Stone fractures unexpectedly. Angles drift. Adjustments follow. At Giza's deepest levels, error appears minimized. Surfaces meet as intended. This implies familiarity with method rather than experimentation. Familiarity requires time. Skills develop across generations. If the techniques visible at Giza were refined, they were not developed during the dynastic era. They appear already mature when dynastic construction begins. This suggests inheritance rather than invention. Egyptian texts do not record technological breakthroughs tied to pyramid construction. There is no celebration of mastering granite or achieving unprecedented precision. Instead, inscriptions emphasize ritual, offerings, and divine sanction. Technical innovation is absent from the narrative. The stone carries that story instead. Later periods shift emphasis. Decorative relief expands. Inscriptions multiply. Stone becomes a medium for symbolism rather than structural expression. The focus moves from how stone is placed to what is written upon it. Craft becomes communicative rather than foundational. This shift reflects broader social changes. Administration expands. Writing becomes central. Architecture serves authority and memory. Earlier priorities recede. Precision remains, but it is no longer the central aim. Stone Without Scars describes this transition quietly. The absence of heavy tool marks, debris, and correction does not prove advanced machinery. It indicates deliberation. It suggests a construction philosophy distinct from later dynastic practice. Time emerges as a hidden factor. Given enough time, simple methods can achieve remarkable results. A culture unconcerned with deadlines could shape stone slowly, refining surfaces until errors disappeared. The stone does not record duration. It records outcome. Nothing at Giza suggests urgency. The scale is vast. The planning is conservative. Redundancy appears built in. This does not resemble the work of rulers racing against mortality. It resembles a mindset oriented toward continuity. The deepest stonework resists explanation because it belongs to a phase of activity that left no written trace. The builders did not describe their tools. They did not need to. Their confidence is visible in the absence of struggle. Later builders recognized this quality. They did not erase these surfaces. They built around them. The scars that would explain the process are missing. What remains is finish without visible effort, precision without commentary, and stone shaped in a way later generations did not repeat. Stone without scars does not resolve the mystery. It refines it. The absence of marks directs attention away from lost machines and toward time, intent, and continuity. It suggests that the earliest phase of work at Giza belongs to a chapter of human activity that predates written explanation, preserved not in text, but in restraint. The empty spaces below, chambers that were never used. Beneath the Giza Plateau, space appears where it should not. Unlike tombs or storage chambers, they contain no objects, no inscriptions, and no signs of reuse. Their existence complicates simple ideas of purpose. At Giza, some of the most carefully prepared spaces were never meant to be filled at all. Early explorers encountered these voids unexpectedly. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, shafts and cavities were uncovered while clearing sand and surveying foundations. Some were dismissed as natural fissures in the limestone. Others were sealed so completely that air pressure shifted when they were breached. In 1902, workers reported opening a cavity beneath the plateau that contained only fine mineral dust and unmoving air. No debris, no tools, no burials. The space had been closed long enough for stillness itself to accumulate. As investigations continued, doubts grew about a natural origin. Limestone does develop cavities, but these typically follow irregular paths shaped by water. The voids beneath Giza often show flat ceilings, straight walls, and right angles. Such geometry is uncommon in natural formations. Nearby caves provide a contrast. Their surfaces curve and wander. The spaces beneath the plateau remain controlled and restrained. Even within the Great Pyramid, emptiness raises questions. The subterranean chamber, cut deep into bedrock, was never finished. Its floor is uneven. Its walls are rough, yet the descending passage that leads to it was carved with care, aligned precisely, and sealed deliberately. Reaching this chamber required significant effort. The decision to abandon it appears intentional rather than forced. The space exists without explanation. This pattern is not isolated. Beneath the plateau, modern geophysical surveys have revealed additional voids that were never entered in antiquity. Muon scanning in the 21st century detected large cavities above the Grand Gallery and within the pyramid's core. These spaces were unknown to ancient robbers and modern archaeologists alike. They were not described in any surviving text. Their presence suggests planning that extended beyond immediate use or visibility. Sealed spaces imply intent. Leaving a chamber empty differs from failing to complete it. Sealing requires labor. Stones must be fitted tightly. Passages must be blocked with care. These actions suggest that emptiness was not an oversight. It was part of the design. Dynastic Egyptian burial practices make this absence more striking. Tombs were typically filled with goods, inscriptions, and symbolic objects. Even modest burials included provisions for the afterlife. At Giza's hidden levels, nothing was placed. These chambers do not fit known funerary traditions. They do not align with storage practices either. Valuable materials were not forgotten underground. Symbolic explanations have been proposed. Some scholars suggest that the voids represented underworld regions or transitional zones. Yet symbolic chambers in Egypt were usually marked. Reliefs, texts, and iconography made meaning visible. Here, meaning is concealed. The spaces remain mute. Structural explanations address only part of the problem. Empty spaces can reduce weight and manage stress within massive stone structures. This may explain some internal cavities. It does not explain carefully sealed chambers beneath the plateau, positioned away from primary load-bearing zones. Their placement suggests intention beyond engineering necessity. Another possibility is long-term planning. These spaces may have been reserved for future use that never occurred. If so, the planning horizon extended beyond a single reign. Dynastic projects often adapted quickly to political change. Abandoned plans usually leave evidence of revision. At Giza, revision is absent. The spaces were left untouched rather than repurposed. The lack of reuse is significant. Later, Egyptians reused stone extensively. Temples were dismantled. Blocks were quarried from older monuments. Yet these voids remained sealed, even as surrounding structures were altered. This suggests that reopening them was prohibited or considered inappropriate. Respect for inherited boundaries appears to have endured. Egyptian texts occasionally refer to hidden places beneath sacred ground. These references are vague and symbolic, offering no maps or measurements. Still, they establish a precedent. Some spaces were not meant for access. Sacred ground could contain areas defined by absence rather than occupation. If the earliest builders valued space differently, emptiness itself may have carried meaning. In this view, the voids beneath Giza act as markers within a larger spatial system. The precision of these spaces supports this interpretation. Their dimensions are controlled. Their placement aligns with broader architectural patterns. They are not random gaps. They appear planned, even though their purpose remains hidden. Dynastic Egyptians inherited this arrangement. They did not erase it. Instead, they built above it, respecting limits they did not establish. The continued sealing of these chambers implies adherence to rules whose origins were already distant. The reasons may have been forgotten. The practice remained. Modern exploration often seeks artifacts. When none are found, disappointment follows. Yet emptiness can convey information. It indicates restraint. It suggests that not every space was meant to be used or explained. In cultures oriented toward permanence, some things are preserved by being left alone. The voids beneath Giza resist narrative. They do not tell stories of kings or gods. They contain no remains. They simply exist, shaped and sealed. Their presence challenges the assumption that all ancient constructions served immediate, visible purposes. These chambers also challenge timelines. Sealing a space and leaving it untouched for millennia requires confidence that future generations will respect that decision. This confidence implies continuity. At Giza, it proved justified. The empty spaces below the plateau suggest that construction involved more than monumentality. It required controlling absence as carefully as presence. Stone was placed deliberately. Space was withheld deliberately. Both actions demanded planning. These voids were not forgotten. They were preserved. Their emptiness was intentional, and that intention has endured. They reveal not who built Giza, but how space itself was understood, measured, ordered, inheriting the monument, when names came after stone. By the time the first pharaohs ruled Egypt, the Giza Plateau was already defined. The ground was leveled, major alignments were fixed, massive stone forms stood in place or were partially embedded in the landscape. Dynastic Egypt did not arrive at an empty site. It encountered something already structured, already oriented, and already demanding respect. The earliest royal inscriptions at Giza do not describe creation. They describe association. Names are carved onto stone that shows signs of earlier exposure. Cartouches appear on blocks that had already weathered. In several cases, inscriptions were added in locations that were visible rather than foundational. Ownership was declared on the surface, not at the core. This pattern reflects a broader dynastic habit. Egyptian kings rarely dismantled sacred structures they inherited. Instead, they restored, renamed, and integrated them into state religion. Temples across Egypt show layers of modification rather than replacement. Walls are thickened. Reliefs are recut. Older forms remain beneath newer meanings. At Giza, this process is unusually restrained. Dynastic builders added causeways, temples, and subsidiary pyramids. They did not alter the fundamental geometry of the plateau. The spacing of the major pyramids remained untouched. Their orientation was preserved. The underlying plan was treated as fixed. Texts from the Old Kingdom emphasize restoration as a royal duty. Kings present themselves as renewers of ancient order rather than innovators. The phrase, restoring what was found in ruin, appears repeatedly in later periods, but its logic applies early. Authority is gained by aligning with what already exists. The Great Pyramid itself reflects this logic. While traditionally attributed to Khufu, internal evidence suggests a more complex relationship. Quarry marks bearing Khufu's name appear in upper relieving chambers, not in foundational blocks. These marks confirm involvement, not origin. They indicate that dynastic builders worked on the structure, not necessarily that they conceived it from bare rock. Similar patterns appear at other sites. At Saqqara, later pyramids reuse earlier enclosures. At Karnak, successive pharaohs expand an existing sacred axis rather than redefining it. Egyptian architecture favors continuity over disruption. Giza represents this principle at its most extreme. Religious integration followed architectural inheritance. Older monuments were absorbed into dynastic cosmology. The Sphinx, likely ancient even by Old Kingdom standards, was reinterpreted as a solar guardian. Its original purpose, if any, was replaced with a new identity that fit emerging beliefs. The monument remained. The story changed. This process required selective memory. Dynastic Egypt preserved what reinforced legitimacy and allowed older meanings to fade. The lack of origin stories for Giza's larger structures may reflect this strategy. Explaining a monument's unknown origins would weaken royal authority. Associating with its power strengthened it. Priestly classes played a key role in this transition. They maintained rituals tied to specific locations rather than to builders. Sacred places mattered more than historical accuracy. As long as ceremonies functioned, origins were secondary. Over time, practical knowledge was replaced by symbolic language. Astronomical alignments remained, but their technical basis faded into myth. Stone precision persisted, but explanations shifted toward divine inspiration. The monument's function adapted to the needs of the present. Dynastic Egyptians did not appear troubled by the age of what they inherited. Antiquity enhanced sacredness. A monument without a known origin carried greater authority. Its presence suggested timelessness rather than authorship. The absence of foundational records thus becomes understandable. Silence protected legitimacy. Writing claimed stewardship, not invention. The past was honored by being left undefined. This approach explains why later generations continued to preserve Giza's layout, even as political centers shifted. The plateau remained a fixed point in cultural memory. It was not simply royal property, it was inherited ground. Inheriting the monument does not imply deception. It implies adaptation. Dynastic Egypt encountered structures that exceeded its own explanatory framework. Rather than dismantle them, it integrated them, meaning followed stone, not the reverse. The result is a layered site. Physical forms originate in one era. Names and rituals belong to another. The layers coexist without fully merging. Stone remains older than story. Giza stands today as a record of this process. It shows how civilizations adopt what they do not fully understand. They rename it. They ritualize it. They preserve it. In doing so, they extend its life far beyond their own. The monument outlasted its inheritors. The names carved upon it fade faster than the stone beneath. What remains is not a single act of construction, but a long sequence of acceptance. Inheritance shaped Giza more than invention. Dynastic Egypt did not erase the past. It stood upon it, added meaning to it, and allowed it to endure. Time without dates. The plateau that resists chronology. At Giza, time does not behave as it should. Archaeology depends on sequence. Layers accumulate. Tools evolve. Styles change. Dates anchor interpretation. On the plateau, these anchors loosen. The deeper one looks, the less cooperative the timeline becomes. Stone remains, but dates drift. Dynastic Egypt is well dated. King lists, inscriptions, and synchronisms with neighboring cultures provide a reliable framework. The fourth dynasty sits comfortably within the 3rd millennium BCE. Names align with monuments. Reigns follow one another in orderly fashion. This clarity dissolves when attention shifts from surface inscriptions to foundational stone. The bedrock beneath Giza offers no dates. It carries no organic material suitable for direct radiocarbon analysis. Stone cannot be dated in the same way as wood or bone. Archaeologists instead rely on association. If a structure contains material from a known period, the structure is often assigned that date. At Giza, this method becomes unreliable. Organic samples found in mortar produce inconsistent results. Some charcoal fragments yield dates centuries older than the 4th dynasty. Others appear younger. These discrepancies are often explained as reuse of old material. While reuse is plausible, it introduces uncertainty rather than resolution. A reused sample does not date construction. It only dates the source of the material. Stratigraphy offers little help. The plateau was leveled before major construction. Earlier occupation layers, if they existed, were removed. The result is a clean surface supporting massive structures without visible developmental phases beneath them. Weathering complicates matters further. Certain stone surfaces show erosion patterns inconsistent with the climate of dynastic Egypt. The Sphinx enclosure remains the most discussed example. Vertical erosion channels suggest prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. Such conditions ended in Egypt thousands of years before the Old Kingdom. The stone preserves evidence of an earlier environment, yet the surrounding narrative remains fixed in dynastic time. Attempts to compress this erosion into dynastic timelines strain plausibility. Short periods of intense rain do not replicate the observed patterns. Wind erosion produces different signatures. The stone does not conform neatly to expected rates. Time stretches beyond written history. Astronomical alignments reinforce this tension. Alignments based on precession correspond to sky positions that predate dynastic chronology. While interpretations vary, the underlying issue remains. Alignments tie stone to celestial configurations that shift slowly. If the reference sky differs from the dynastic era, the construction logic points earlier. Egyptian texts do not resolve this. They rarely assign absolute dates to sacred events. Time is cyclical rather than linear. Mythic reigns last thousands of years. Gods rule before kings. Chronology blends into cosmology. This worldview does not prioritize precise dating. It preserves sequence without measurement. The Palermo stone exemplifies this approach. It lists rulers before the dynasties without concern for plausibility by modern standards. Reigns span centuries. The transition into dynastic time is recorded without explanation. The stone does not pause to justify the shift. It assumes continuity. Manetho's later history follows the same pattern. Long ages precede human kingship. These ages are not dated in years, recognizable to modern chronology. They exist outside conventional time. This perspective aligns with Giza's resistance to dating. The site belongs partly to recorded history and partly to remembered deep time. Modern chronologies struggle because they expect a clear beginning. Giza offers none. Construction appears mature at its earliest visible phase. There is no experimental stage preserved, no gradual refinement. The work emerges already precise. This suggests that development occurred elsewhere or earlier, outside the visible record. The absence of transitional forms is telling. At other sites, architectural evolution is visible. Early attempts are crude, later versions refine technique. At Giza, refinement appears first, later additions simplify. This reversal confuses linear dating models. Attempts to anchor Giza using tool typology encounter similar problems. Tool marks vary by depth rather than by style progression. Deeper work appears more controlled. Upper work aligns with known dynastic tools. This vertical differentiation suggests chronological layering, but without dates attached. Time without dates does not imply chaos. It implies a different relationship with time. The builders responsible for Giza's deepest elements did not embed dates in stone. They did not leave calendars or king lists. Their work was meant to endure beyond measurement. Dynastic Egyptians inherited this ambiguity. Rather than resolve it, they integrated it. Sacred time replaced historical time. The monument became eternal by remaining undated. Its power lay partly in its unknown age. Modern archaeology seeks resolution. It prefers defined periods and clear sequences. Giza resists this preference. Each method applied yields partial answers and new questions. The plateau does not reject history. It exceeds it. This excess is visible in the stone itself. Surfaces weathered before names were added. Alignments fixed before rituals were written. Spaces sealed before dynasties formed. These facts do not negate dynastic involvement. They complicate it. Time without dates is not a failure of method alone. It reflects a mismatch between modern expectations and ancient priorities. The builders did not organize their world around calendars as we do. They organized it around order, alignment, and continuity. Giza preserves that order without explaining when it began. The lack of dates is itself a form of information. It suggests that the builders did not consider time something to record in numbers. Their focus lay elsewhere. Dynastic Egypt later imposed dates where it could. Names were carved. Reigns were counted. Yet the foundation remained undated. The deeper layers stayed beyond reach. The plateau thus occupies two temporal realms. Above ground, history unfolds with names and dynasties. Below ground, time stretches without markers. The two coexist without fully reconciling. Time without dates does not claim certainty. It observes resistance. The stone refuses to be pinned to a single moment. It holds evidence of duration without chronology. This resistance forces a reconsideration of how ancient construction is understood. Not everything was meant to be dated. Some things were meant to last. Giza endures not because its age is known, but because it is not. It stands outside ordinary time, carrying traces of a past that was never meant to be measured, only maintained. The builders who disappeared, a civilization without remains. If a culture shaped the earliest foundations at Giza, it left remarkably little behind. No cities ring the plateau from that period. No cemeteries appear in the surrounding desert that can be securely linked to the deepest work. No domestic debris accumulates beneath the leveled ground. The absence is not total, but it is consistent enough to demand attention. Large construction projects usually leave broad footprints. Housing expands. Food production increases. Waste accumulates. Tools break and are discarded. Graves multiply. At Giza, these indicators appear only in layers associated with later dynastic activity. The earliest phase of stone preparation sits directly on bedrock, clean and quiet, as if it emerged without a supporting society. This absence has often been explained by erosion or later disturbance. The Nile floods, wind reshapes the desert, and later builders reused earlier materials. These processes can erase evidence, yet they rarely erase everything evenly. At other ancient sites, traces survive despite similar conditions. At Giza, the silence is unusually complete. Pre-dynastic Egypt does provide settlements, but their scale and technology do not align neatly with the precision visible at Giza's deepest levels. Villages along the Nile show gradual development. Their tools are simple, their architecture is modest. Nothing in these remains suggests the capacity to level a plateau, align it to the sky, and shape massive stone with minimal correction. Graves present a similar mismatch. Pre-dynastic burials are abundant and well-studied. They contain pottery, tools, and personal items. Their customs are consistent across regions. None are clearly associated with large-scale stone construction. The social organization implied by these burials does not reflect a workforce capable of long-term, highly controlled building on the scale implied by Giza's foundation. One possibility is that the builders were not concentrated in large settlements near the site. They may have operated seasonally or episodically, arriving to work and leaving little trace. Such patterns would reduce domestic debris. Over long periods, their temporary camps could disappear entirely. Stone, by contrast, would endure. Another possibility is that the builders lived elsewhere and traveled to Giza for specific purposes. If their central settlements lay in regions now submerged, eroded, or buried beneath later development, their material record could be lost. Rising sea levels after the last ice age reshaped coastlines globally. Nile Delta sediments have accumulated rapidly over millennia, burying early habitation layers deeply. Some scholars suggest that early complex societies may have favored perishable materials for housing. Wood, reeds, and mud brick decay quickly. If stone was reserved for specialized functions rather than daily life, the imbalance would be expected. Everyday structures vanish. Monumental work remains. This pattern appears elsewhere. At Göbekli Tepe, massive stone pillars were erected by groups with no known permanent settlements nearby. The builders left little domestic architecture, yet they organized complex construction. The site challenges assumptions about the relationship between monument building and urban life. Giza may reflect a similar dynamic on a larger scale. The lack of graves remains troubling. Societies usually bury their dead near places of significance. If Giza was sacred ground, one might expect associated burials, yet none securely date to a pre-dynastic phase that matches the earlier stonework. This suggests either different burial practices or a separation between living space, sacred space, and mortuary space. Egyptian mythology hints at such separation. Texts describe beings who ruled before humans, associated with the land but not buried in it. Whether symbolic or historical, the idea reinforces the notion of builders who did not leave graves behind in expected ways. Another explanation involves time. If the earliest construction occurred over extremely long periods, the workforce may have been small and distributed. Incremental work by successive generations could achieve large results without leaving dense archaeological signatures. The absence of concentrated remains would then reflect method rather than mystery. This slow build model aligns with other evidence at Giza. Precision appears prioritized over speed. Correction marks are rare. Planning seems conservative. These traits suit a culture unconstrained by deadlines or political cycles. Such a culture would not require large, permanent labor camps. Later dynastic Egypt operated differently. Pyramid towns appear. Workers' villages are documented. Food distribution is recorded. Administration leaves paper trails. The contrast between these phases is stark. One leaves abundant evidence. The other leaves almost none. The disappearance of the earliest builders may therefore be more apparent than real. Their material culture may have been light, dispersed, and ephemeral. Their legacy lay in shaping space rather than occupying it. When later societies arrived, they encountered finished ground rather than living communities. Dynastic Egyptians did not attempt to locate or commemorate these builders. Their texts do not describe discovering abandoned cities or encountering remnants of earlier peoples at Giza. The silence suggests that whatever preceded them had already faded into the landscape. Over time, the plateau became detached from its makers. It transformed into sacred inheritance rather than remembered construction. The builder's absence became part of the monument's authority. Something that arrives without origin invites reverence. Modern archaeology struggles with such cases because it relies on density. It expects societies to leave accumulations. When none appear, uncertainty grows. Giza's earliest phase resists these expectations. It presents outcome without context. The builders who disappeared are defined by this resistance. They are inferred from stone rather than from artifacts. Their presence is measured through alignment, preparation, and restraint. Their absence is measured through missing settlements, graves, and debris. This does not imply that they vanished suddenly or catastrophically. It suggests that their mode of existence did not prioritize lasting material traces. They left behind what mattered to them. The rest dissolved. The plateau preserves this imbalance clearly. Monumental work endures. Human traces do not. The builders recede into prehistory not because they were insignificant, but because their significance was expressed differently. Giza stands as a record of that expression. It shows how a culture can disappear without collapse. leaving behind a landscape shaped so thoroughly that later civilizations accept it as given. The builders remain unnamed not because they are unknowable, but because they did not leave the kinds of remains that produce names. Their disappearance is complete only in conventional terms. In stone, their presence persists. Knowledge without language. How stone preserved thought. At Giza, information exists without words. The plateau communicates through placement, proportion, and alignment rather than inscription. This mode of transmission does not rely on reading. It relies on measurement. Anyone who observes carefully can extract intent from form alone. The builders embedded their understanding into space, allowing knowledge to persist without language. Geometry governs the site. Distances between structures are not arbitrary. Angles repeat. Proportions remain consistent across scale. These relationships do not announce themselves. They must be measured. When measured, patterns emerge. The plateau functions as a coherent system rather than a collection of independent monuments. The Great Pyramid provides a clear example. Its base perimeter divided by twice its height yields a value close to the constant known as pi. Whether this relationship was intentional remains debated. What matters is that the relationship exists precisely. It is not approximate. Achieving it requires planning. Such planning requires abstraction. The builders thought in ratios rather than absolute units. Ratios communicate without language. A ratio remains true regardless of scale or unit. This makes it ideal for preservation. Even if measuring systems change, the relationship persists. At Giza, proportions endure despite erosion, damage, and restoration. Orientation serves a similar role. Aligning structures to cardinal directions fixes them within a universal frame of reference. By aligning stone to the cardinal points, the builders ensured that future observers could reconstruct intent through orientation alone. Astronomical alignment extends this principle. The sky offers repeating cycles that transcend generations. Embedding celestial relationships into stone anchors construction to time beyond human lifespan. The knowledge required to do this does not need explanation once expressed. The alignment itself becomes the message. The absence of text becomes functional. Writing can be misinterpreted, mistranslated, or destroyed. Stone geometry resists such decay. A straight line remains straight. A right angle remains 90 degrees. The medium preserves meaning through constraint rather than description. This approach suggests that the builders prioritized durability of knowledge over accessibility. Not everyone could understand the message. Only those who measured, observed, and compared would see it. Knowledge was not broadcast, it was encoded. Egyptian culture later adopted writing extensively. Hieroglyphs filled temples and tombs, meaning became explicit. Yet the deepest layers at Giza remained silent. The builders did not retroactively annotate the stone. They allowed form to speak for itself. This silence may have been deliberate. Writing fixes meaning. Geometry allows flexibility. The message adapts while the medium remains constant. The pyramid texts illustrate this transition. They describe ascent, order, and cosmic alignment using mythic language. Yet the structures they reference already embodied these ideas physically. The text overlays narrative onto form. The form does not depend on the text. Knowledge without language also explains continuity. Dynastic Egyptians inherited the site and understood enough to preserve it. They aligned new additions with existing geometry. They did not disrupt proportions they did not fully explain. Respect replaced comprehension. This respect preserved the message. Later cultures could measure what earlier ones had built. The absence of explanation invited study rather than closure. Giza became a reference rather than a relic. Modern analysis follows the same path. Researchers measure angles, distances, and alignments. They infer intent from consistency. They reconstruct thought without words. The process mirrors the original method of transmission. The builder's choice to encode knowledge spatially suggests confidence in the medium. Stone would outlast language. Ratios would outlast symbols. Orientation would outlast belief. The plateau would continue to teach without speaking. This approach aligns with other ancient traditions. Megalithic sites across the world use geometry and alignment rather than text. Stone circles mark solstices. Structures track lunar cycles. These sites communicate through experience rather than explanation. At Giza, this method reaches an extreme. The scale amplifies precision. The message becomes harder to ignore. Knowledge is present whether acknowledged or not. The absence of language does not indicate absence of thought. It indicates a different strategy. The builders trusted form to preserve what mattered. They did not rely on memory or myth alone. They relied on constraint. Constraint limits variation. A measured angle resists reinterpretation. It either aligns or it does not. This binary quality preserves intent across time. Language, by contrast, evolves. Knowledge without language thus reframes the mystery of Giza. The lack of inscriptions at the deepest levels is not a loss. It is a feature. The builders chose a medium that does not decay into ambiguity. This choice complicates modern expectations. Archaeology often seeks text to confirm interpretation. At Giza, interpretation begins with measurement. The stone demands engagement rather than reading. The plateau remains an open document. It invites repeated examination. Each generation can measure anew. Each can discover relationships independently. The knowledge resets with each observer. This self-renewing quality may explain the site's longevity. Giza does not rely on tradition alone. It continually produces insight through observation. Its silence is active rather than empty. The builders who disappeared did not leave instructions. They left structure. That structure continues to function as a carrier of intent. Knowledge without language shows how thought can persist without narrative. It demonstrates that meaning can be preserved through arrangement rather than explanation. At Giza, stone becomes a medium of memory, more reliable than text. The plateau continues to hold this memory quietly. It does not declare what it knows. It waits to be measured. When myths became history, turning inheritance into origin, as dynastic Egypt matured, meaning gathered where explanation was thin, the Giza Plateau, already ancient in form, entered religious language not as a puzzle, but as a given. What could not be dated was sanctified. What could not be explained was absorbed into myth. Over time, narrative did what chronology could not. It made the inherited appear intentional, authored, and eternal. Early religious texts do not describe discovery. They describe remembrance. Sacred places are said to have existed in the first time, Zep Tepi, when order was set in place. This phrase does not function as a date. It functions as a boundary. By placing monuments within Zep Tepi, priests removed the need to explain how they came to be. They had always been. This shift from uncertainty to sanctity is subtle. No decree announces it. Instead, ritual accumulates. Offerings are placed. Festivals recur. Priests maintain alignments already fixed. Over generations, repetition replaces inquiry. The monument becomes historical through use, rather than origin. The Sphinx illustrates this process clearly. By the time of the New Kingdom, it is fully embedded in solar theology. It becomes Horumaket, Horus of the horizon. Its gaze toward the rising sun acquires narrative weight. The fact that the monument predates these associations is no longer relevant. Meaning flows backward. The story adapts to the stone. Myth does not erase uncertainty. It manages it. By embedding monuments within divine cycles, Egyptian religion rendered questions unnecessary. If the gods established order, and the monuments express order, then origin is resolved by attribution rather than evidence. This approach aligns with broader Egyptian thought. The universe was understood as ordered repetition. What mattered was maintenance, not innovation. Kings did not create order. They upheld it. In this framework, claiming to have invented the pyramids would be inappropriate. It would imply disruption rather than continuity. Royal inscriptions reflect this restraint. Pharaohs emphasize piety, restoration, and alignment with Ma'at, the principle of order. They present themselves as caretakers of a system older than themselves. The monuments reinforce this message by their very presence. They appear beyond human scale and memory. Over time, myth hardens into assumed history. Later generations speak of divine builders not as metaphor but as distant rulers. The Shemsu Hor, once listed alongside human kings, drift into legend. Their reigns remain long, their deeds vague. They become narrative placeholders for a time that resists detail. Greek writers encountering Egypt attempted to reconcile these myths with their own historical models. Manetho translated divine ages into dynastic lists. Herodotus reported what priests told him. These accounts blend observation with reverence. They preserve myth as history because no alternative framework exists. The transformation is not deceptive, it is adaptive. Myth provides coherence where evidence is sparse. It allows society to function without resolving every anomaly. Giza's unknown origins become a source of authority rather than embarrassment. This authority shaped practice. Temples were aligned to existing axes. Processions followed ancient causeways. Ritual calendars respected orientations whose rationale was no longer explicit. Myth preserved behavior even as explanation faded. In this way, the monument shaped belief as much as belief shaped the monument. Stone dictated where stories settled. The oldest structures attracted the deepest meanings. Their age amplified their sacredness. Modern readers often treat myth as distortion. In the Egyptian context, myth functioned as preservation. It protected inherited structures from reinterpretation that might lead to alteration. By declaring origins divine, change became sacrilege. The result is a layered record. Physical evidence points to deep time. Textual evidence reframes that depth as sacred prehistory. Neither cancels the other. They coexist, addressing different needs. When myths became history marks the moment when uncertainty was formalized rather than resolved. Giza entered religion fully. Questions of authorship dissolved into cycles of gods and kings. The plateau's silence was translated into ritual language. This translation stabilized the site. It ensured continuity across political shifts and dynastic changes. The process did not require consensus. It required repetition. Each generation inherited both monument and story. The story explained enough to function. The monument remained unchanged. Giza thus became timeless, not because its age was known, but because its origin was placed beyond inquiry. Myth closed the gap that history could not. The plateau continues to reflect this balance. Stone preserves what myth framed. Together, they carried Giza forward. The plateau as a system, one design beneath many forms. Seen individually, the structures at Giza invite comparison. One pyramid is larger, another is placed slightly lower. Temples differ in finish and material. When viewed this way, the site appears incremental, as if built in stages by different hands. The plateau behaves less like a collection of monuments and more like a single integrated system. The first indication lies in the ground itself. The plateau was leveled across a wide area before any visible monument rose above it. This leveling does not follow the contours of the natural landscape, it overrides them. Bedrock was cut down uniformly, creating a controlled plane. This plane establishes a reference surface upon which everything else depends. Without it, long-distance alignment would drift. With it, orientation remains stable. From this prepared surface, relationships unfold. The major pyramids are not placed independently. Their spacing follows proportional rules. Distances between their centers relate to one another through ratios rather than arbitrary measures. These ratios remain consistent even when elevation changes. The placement accounts for bedrock height, horizon lines, and sight lines rather than convenience. Causeways reinforce this integration. Each extends eastward toward the Nile floodplain, yet none follow the river directly. Their orientations align with solar events and cardinal directions. These alignments do not conflict with one another. They converge conceptually rather than physically, binding the site together through shared reference points. The Sphinx occupies a key position within this system. It is not centered on a single monument, it mediates between them. Its enclosure intersects the plateau at a point where geological layers change. The monument faces due east, anchoring the system to the horizon. Its placement ties ground, sky, and stone into a single orientation. Subsurface features extend this coherence below ground. Sealed voids and chambers do not appear randomly. Their locations correspond to surface geometry. They mirror alignments rather than contradict them. Even when their purpose remains unclear, their placement suggests inclusion within a broader plan. The Great Pyramid's internal architecture reflects the same logic. Passages shift direction deliberately. Angles repeat. Vertical and horizontal elements interact with the overall orientation of the plateau. The pyramid does not function as an isolated structure. It echoes the geometry beneath it. This systemic behavior complicates dynastic attribution. Dynastic projects elsewhere show adaptation to terrain and circumstance. Giza shows constraint. New additions conform to existing rules. They do not redefine them. This implies that the rules were established before dynastic builders began modifying the site. Material choice supports this interpretation. The earliest and most structurally critical elements use the hardest stone and the highest precision. Later additions rely more on limestone, mortar, and decoration. The material hierarchy aligns with the system's priorities. What defines the system is made permanent first. Drainage channels carved into bedrock follow the same plan. They do not respond to localized water flow alone. They integrate with the plateau's slope and orientation. Water management appears to have been considered at the same planning stage as monument placement. This level of coordination suggests a unified design phase. The system also accommodates absence. Empty spaces beneath the plateau and within the pyramids are positioned deliberately. They do not interrupt load paths or distort alignments. Their inclusion suggests that voids were as planned as solids. Space was treated as a design element rather than a byproduct. When later builders arrived, they recognized this system intuitively. They did not dismantle it, they navigated it. Temples were added, where alignments allowed. Causeways followed established axes. Subsidiary pyramids respected existing geometry. The system constrained choice. Egyptian religious language absorbed this structure seamlessly. Concepts of order, balance, and cosmic harmony map cleanly onto a site already organized around those principles. The system did not need reinterpretation. It already embodied the values dynastic religion emphasized. This compatibility may explain why the system endured. It did not clash with later belief. It reinforced it. The plateau became a physical expression of Ma'at without requiring alteration. Dynastic Egypt inherited a framework that supported its worldview. Attempts to explain Giza as a sequence of independent projects struggle with these relationships. Independent projects do not typically align so consistently across scale and medium. They adapt, diverge, and correct. The system also resists simplification. Removing one element weakens interpretation of the others. The pyramids make more sense when considered alongside causeways, temples, voids, and bedrock preparation. The whole explains the parts better than the parts explain the whole. This systemic quality implies planning beyond individual lifetimes. Establishing such coherence requires foresight. It requires adherence to rules across generations. This adherence suggests continuity rather than episodic ambition. The lack of explicit planning documents does not negate this. The plan is visible in the result. Geometry replaces instruction. Orientation replaces decree. The system enforces itself through constraint. Modern mapping technologies have made this clearer. Satellite imagery reveals alignments invisible at ground level. Geophysical surveys show subsurface features, reinforcing surface patterns. The more data accumulates, the more integrated the site appears. This integration does not prove a single moment of construction. It proves a single logic. Whether executed over centuries or millennia, the logic remains stable. That stability is the defining feature. The plateau as a system challenges narratives that focus on monuments as expressions of power alone. Power is visible. System is quieter. It governs without announcing itself. It shapes outcomes without leaving signatures. Giza's system continues to function. Sightlines still align. Ratios still resolve. Voids remain sealed. The site operates according to rules set long ago, regardless of who later claimed ownership. Understanding Giza requires shifting perspective. Instead of asking who built which structure, the more revealing question becomes, who defined the system they all obeyed? The answer is not written. It is measured. What was remembered? What was lost? Stone after memory. By the time Egypt entered recorded history, the Giza Plateau already belonged to the past. What survived into dynastic memory was not an origin story, but a framework of use. Rituals were preserved. Alignments were respected. Meanings were applied. What disappeared was explanation. Egyptian texts reveal this imbalance clearly. They describe how monuments functioned, not how they came to be. Pyramids were places of ascent. Temples were points of contact between worlds. Causeways carried symbolic journeys. These roles are defined precisely. Their beginnings are not. Memory retains purpose while shedding process. This selective preservation is common in long-lived cultures. Knowledge that supports continuity is kept. Knowledge that no longer serves immediate needs fades. At Giza, what mattered was that the system worked. It oriented ritual, reinforced cosmology, and legitimized rule. The deeper reasons for its design became unnecessary once the design itself endured. Priestly tradition played a central role in this filtering. Priests were custodians of correct practice. They memorized hymns, gestures, and sequences. They did not investigate origins. To question origin risked destabilizing authority. Stability required repetition, not inquiry. As centuries passed, interpretation replaced understanding. The alignment of pyramids to stars became mythic ascent. Ground preparation became sacred foundation. Empty chambers became underworld symbols, or were ignored entirely. Each generation inherited results and attached meanings suited to its time. Written language contributed to this shift. Once myths were recorded, they solidified. Flexibility diminished. Stories that once adapted orally became fixed. Any earlier explanations that did not fit were excluded. Stone remained constant. Narrative narrowed. Foreign visitors encountered this already filtered memory. Greek historians recorded what Egyptian priests told them. They wrote down divine reigns, sacred ages, and eternal monuments. Their accounts preserved belief rather than investigation. By then, the gap between construction and explanation was already vast. Archaeological evidence suggests that loss was gradual, not sudden. There is no sign of a catastrophic break, no burned archives, no abandoned cities tied directly to Giza's earliest phase. Instead, knowledge thinned slowly as priorities changed. What was no longer practiced ceased to be transmitted. The builders' methods were among the first casualties. Precision remained visible, but technique did not. Alignment persisted, but observation routines vanished. Geometry endured, but instruction disappeared. The system could function without teaching how it was made. Dynastic Egypt accepted this state naturally. Antiquity enhanced sanctity. Monuments without clear origin carried greater authority. They belonged to the gods, not to men. Claiming ignorance became a form of reverence. This attitude preserved the site physically. What could not be explained was not altered. Giza survived because it was untouchable. Its mystery became protection. Modern investigation reverses this logic. Mystery invites analysis. Absence becomes a problem to solve, yet the stone resists full recovery. Too much time has passed. Too little was recorded. What remains is partial. What was remembered at Giza was order, orientation, function, sacred role. What was lost was sequence, process, decision, human context. The stone preserves the former more faithfully than any text could. It cannot preserve the latter. This imbalance defines the site today. Measurement reveals intent. Excavation reveals restraint. Silence reveals continuity. Yet the names, voices, and daily lives of the earliest builders remain inaccessible. Giza demonstrates a limit of archaeology. Not all knowledge is recoverable. Some was never meant to be. Some was embedded in action rather than description. When the action ceased, the explanation ceased with it. The plateau stands as a record of this truth. It carries evidence without commentary. It holds memory without language. It preserves design while allowing motive to dissolve. What was remembered? What was lost does not close the inquiry. It explains why it cannot be closed. The builders shaped stone to endure beyond themselves. They did not shape stories to do the same. Dynastic Egypt remembered enough to use what it inherited. Modern study recovers enough to see that inheritance clearly. Between these points lies a gap that may never be filled. The Giza Plateau remains complete in form and incomplete in narrative. That condition is not accidental. It is the final outcome of a system designed to outlast explanation. Stone remains, memory fades, the balance holds. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, consider subscribing for more calm, long-form journeys into forgotten history. Like the video if you want this series to continue, and share it with someone who enjoys questions that don't rush toward answers.